Welcome to the Cannabis Review, another episode. Thanks to all the viewers of the last previous episodes. Your views are much appreciated. We've got a great show for you today. I know a lot of people saw the news about New Zealand in the press over the last couple of weeks, so we've got one of the experts from New Zealand to join us here, none other than Manu Caddie. How you doing, Manu? You well?
Very good, thank you.
So for those of you who don't know Manu, he is the co-founder of RUABIOSCIENCE, which is a globally respected company based in New Zealand, recently listed on the New Zealand exchange, and are one of the top pioneers in the country. I'll let Manu give you a little bit of an overview of exactly what it is RUABIOSCIENCE do.
Cool, yeah. We started in 2016, myself and my other co-founder. We live in a very rural part of New Zealand, a village of about 800 people. That's about 2 hours drive from the closest town. It's about 30,000 people, right on the east coast of the North Island. And so high unemployment. A lot of people moved away over the last sort of 40 odd years. And we were looking at job opportunities and economic development opportunities for our community. Started looking at some of our native plants and bioactive extracts that we could get from that and turn it into natural health products. Someone asked us if we'd thought about growing hemp, and when they suggested that, we thought that's a good idea. There's a lot of illicit cannabis grown in our region that supplies the rest of the country. Because we're so isolated, it's fairly easy to hide your crop, and every sort of season there's helicopters from the police that fly over and raid the illicit crops, but most of them survive. And so there's a lot of expertise, and has been for many generations, I guess, sort of last, some are into their third generation of growers. And so we got into that then, and I guess we could see the way that the global market was shifting and opening up, as well as within New Zealand, the regulations, particularly around medicinal cannabis, were liberalising. And so we saw an opportunity there, and given the expertise in the community and the land available and things, we thought we'd get into it. So we had a charitable company at the time that was all around community development, and got some private investors to come in. We also had a crowd fund with our community. We raised a couple of $1 million in 2018 over a week, where we'd sort of told the community what we were going to do, and just people really got behind us in the region, which was great. And from that we were able to attract other private investment. And so we've been very focused on pharmaceutical cannabis. That's been the only option in New Zealand. So we've had the referendum just in the last month, but up until now it's only been pharmaceutical grade, and it's GMP, which is this, any medicine that you get as a prescription should be GMP, regardless of the condition or what the product is. And so New Zealand set GMP as the standard for cannabis, medicinal cannabis, whereas jurisdictions like Canada haven't used GMP as the standard. They've had requirements slightly below that, which has presented some challenges for Canadian companies trying to export. And so I was involved in the development of those regulations through 2018. The law was changed to allow for commercial production. Over 2019, the regulations were developed with the government, and I was part of the committee that oversaw the development of those regulations. The government had quite an open process around those. It wasn't like the bureaucrats went away and wrote it all and came back. They involved prescribers particularly, as well as myself from the industry and some researchers and so on. So, and then the regulations in a draft form went out to the public, and there was an opportunity to feedback on those before they were finalised. And so I think we've got pretty good regulations. As I say, the standard is very high, which enables us to export to places like the EU, with that GMP grade being the bottom line. So that's the regulatory environment, and in April this year that kicked in. And so commercial licenses have been issued since then, and we were one of the first companies to gain a commercial license. Up until now, they've only been research licenses, and we got the first research license in August 2018. So I think there's about a dozen licenses that have been granted in New Zealand. There's no cap on those. And most of those are for cultivation. Some of them are for manufacturing as well. and for supply. So there's a few companies that import product solely and distribute it to pharmacies. And so, yeah, that's sort of the situation. As you said, we listed, so we're well capitalized now and can progress. We have a distribution deal signed with a German company. We're very focused on Germany as our first market, in addition to New Zealand. And yeah, getting underway for our GMP audit, which is separate to the cannabis license that happens at the end of this month. So our team are working on that. We've got about 25 staff employed by the company. And they're much more skilled and expert in all areas of the operations than I am. I was really just one of the initiators, and yeah, it's great to have such a talented team and being able to attract people from around the world. And COVID hasn't had too big an impact on us, which has been good. People have been able to carry on. There's a lot of documentation and preparation, obviously, around pharmaceutical production. So yeah, we've been able to carry on with that, and now we're out of lockdown and able to get into our validation runs and so on. It's yeah, it's all hands on deck.
Happy days. A wise investment for the village and the community who invested in at the very start. I have no doubt a lot of them are happy people now.
Yeah.
That's
We were able to
see.
see people have got 2 or 3 times back what they put in terms of the value of their shares now that they can trade on the stock exchange.
Excellent. Something you touched on there is probably going to be the first topic that I want to touch on. I know a lot of people are going to be really interested in this. So it's the recent referendum that happened in New Zealand. We saw that it didn't pass. Can you just give us a little overview of how that started, the process of putting that into place? For a country like Ireland, we're pretty similar to New Zealand in terms of population, a little bit to the right in terms of politics. So how would a country like us, if we were doing it again, how did you guys initially start the whole process?
Yeah, I mean, there's been cannabis reform campaigners working for decades in New Zealand, at least 20, 30 years. And some of our MPs, particularly Green MPs, have really promoted that. We had one of the first Rastafarian MPs in the world in the Green Party, Nandor Tanchos, and while he was in there, he's out of Parliament now, but while he was in there, it was a big issue for him, and some of his colleagues in the Green Party picked that up, and it became Green Party policy to promote legalisation and reform of the cannabis legislation. So 2017, when the Labour government was elected, chosen, so we've got an MMP system, and at the last election it was 50-50 between the Conservative National Party, more right-wing, and the Labour Party. And the Kingmaker, the New Zealand First Party, a very small party, but it got to choose the balance of power, and it went with Labour and the Green Party. And so the Greens, as part of their coalition agreement, required that cannabis legalisation be on the agenda. And New Zealand First they're very conservative, and they agreed to a referendum being the only way that they would support it. So it went to a whole country referendum, and it coincided with our general election that happened in October, which was supposed to happen in September, was delayed a month because of COVID. So yeah, over the last 3 years, the government prepared a draft bill, which was a really good strategy. I think it wasn't just a yes or no, do you support legalisation, because who knows what legalisation means. And so by having a draft bill, it was very detailed, and people could see all of the thinking and exactly what they were voting on, while it would still need to go through the normal select committee process with public submissions to be improved. There was a lot of detail in that legislation. So I think that was a good strategy for anyone else that was going to use a referendum as a potential mechanism to achieve a change. As I understand it, nowhere is actually legalised through referendum. Though I see there's quite a few states in the last 48 hours that have legalised because it was on their ballot. But in terms of whole countries, no one's used the referendum as a way to achieve the legalisation change. So this afternoon, we find out the final results, and there's a chance that it may still pass. So the interim vote suggested came back as 46% supported legalisation and 53% opposed. There was a number of campaigns in favour of the yes vote, and some would say that those campaigns were probably not coordinated enough into a really simple message for voters, and we were very facts-based, I think, and perhaps that was a mistake. And the no campaigns were led by a religious group, lobby group called Family First, very influenced and supported by North American lobbyists, and had very misleading campaign, but very effective in terms of its simplicity. And basically they made up a whole lot of stuff, very scaremongering, and a lot of people bought into that. So unfortunately, yeah, they were very good, had a bit of money behind them. And on the other hand, the Yes campaign, while there's a number of companies in the medicinal sector who have said that they would be interested in getting into recreational or providing products under a legal regime, none of us are making money yet, or very few, only the importers. No one's into production and sales, so there's a lot of cash burn and little available to really back the legalization campaign. There was some talk of the big Canadian companies supporting legalization here, but I'm not aware of hundreds of thousands of dollars, let alone millions, flowing into the country to support the Yes campaign from companies that may have benefited from that. Of course, under a legal regime, there's no exports. It's purely a domestic situation, a market, and that may have had some bearing on the level of interest from overseas companies, though profits can always flow back if there was a locally owned entity. Anyway, that's the campaign, and we'll find out this afternoon. So basically, of the remaining special votes, and I think there's over 500,000 special votes to be counted, they would need to have at least 70% in favour of legalisation or 68% to get it over the line in terms of the majority. So a bit like the States at the moment, I guess we're a pretty divided country on that particular issue. It was there was also another referendum on right to die or euthanasia legislation, which was successful. So 2/3 of voters supported that, and I wonder whether that had some bearing on the cannabis referendum. But yeah, it's not looking good. We're not optimistic. There's still a chance that it will happen, but sort of in a few hours we'll know the final result. And so, yeah, in terms of advice for others, not convinced that a referendum is the best way, because you do get, particularly in maybe a country like Ireland with a fairly conservative religious community, you may find similarly there's a strong campaign of scaremongering to put people off. And I guess what we needed to really highlight was, and there's some suggestion from the No campaign that there hasn't been enough time gone by in terms of the legalization in Canada, but we could have highlighted a lot more the impact that legalization's had in Canada, and some of the results around particularly youth access and use, which they've seen drop by half since legalization after 2 years. So those kind of statistics, while everyone said that they cared about young people and they didn't want access, which is why they were voting no, if they actually looked at the real evidence, it's pretty clear that legalization does provide more control and regulation around the product, rather than having it available through unlicensed, unregulated sources. And so just a lot of disappointment there, I guess. We had a meeting yesterday with the Yes campaigners, and there's certainly a mandate in many ways to progress and carry on, and an appetite in the public consciousness to see change, obviously. And even in those who voted no, there was a strong level of support for decriminalisation, which again most people didn't understand would sort of provide some perverse incentives for continuing to supply unregulated product to, with no quality control to anyone who wants it, including young people. So that may still happen, and the government, while the first interim results came out, the Justice Minister who was in charge of the referendum said we'll take that as a as a decision of the people, and we'll honour it, and we won't make any changes. There's still plenty of room for the new government to progress the cannabis law reform agenda in different ways. There was another piece of legislation passed last year that directed police, where it's in the public interest, to direct people caught with cannabis to health services rather than prosecution. And we've seen that applied in a uneven, ad hoc kind of way to date. And I think there's some opportunity there to say, actually, anyone found with cannabis should be referred to health rather than prosecution, so it becomes a health issue rather than a criminal one. Take out that public interest discretion clause, and yeah, so it's a form of decriminalisation. And I think the other one that came through strongly, including from those opposed to legalisation, was in the end they admitted that the medicinal cannabis scheme isn't working, in the sense that unlike places like Germany, where there's a high proportion of health insurance, we don't have that, and so there's no subsidies for pharmaceutical grade products, which means that those who are sick really can't afford to access the medicines that are being produced. And so there's needing to be some review of the scheme there, and looking at ways for people that are very sick to be able to access their own medicine, which could include growing their own if they had a prescription from a doctor or something like that. So I think that'll be the other area that we see progress on if the referendum isn't successful, that the government's going to have to do something to improve access for medical patients, which at the moment is prescription only.
Okay, yeah, well, fingers crossed now that we have a little bit more action on that, and we may even have the 70% needed if all goes to plan. Yeah. I'm going to jump onto a topic now that I know a lot of people are interested in, and they don't ever get to really have an expert explain too much about them. That's the genetics of cannabis. Can you just give us a little overview on your view on the genetics of cannabis and anything exciting that you guys are doing within this space?
Yeah, well, just a disclaimer, I'm definitely not an expert in cannabis genetics. We do have some experts in the team. And it's one of the wins that we did get in the medicinal cannabis legislation was the opportunity to bring illicit genetics into the legal regime. And unlike other jurisdictions, we seem to be the only one in the world that hasn't put a closure date on that process. So many of them will just open it up for a couple of weeks or a couple of months and say, whatever you've got at the end of that, we're going to lock it off, and those will be the genetics that are allowed into the legal regime. Fortunately, New Zealand has said that all we have to do is make a declaration that we have illicit genetics in our possession, and where there's a limit on that, and so we have to, every time we want another set of seeds or plants to come into our licensed operation, we need to declare that. But it is a good opportunity for those who have been growing and breeding in the illicit market to bring their genetics into a regulated regime and make some legitimate royalties or income from the sale of those, or just allow them to be used by others. And we have a few suppliers, breeders, who just want to free their plants to be utilised in whatever way is good for patients. So the other person we have involved is a gentleman by the name of Jeremy Plum, who's based in Portland, and his mission in life is really to breed both really stable genetics so that you get a really consistent chemical profile every time and yield, but also to develop particular chemical characteristics of varieties that match with what the medical researchers are saying seem to be efficacious for particular indications and conditions. So there's a lot of time and effort that goes into those processes. Jeremy works closely with Dr. Ethan Russo, who's who's in GW Pharmaceuticals when they were developing Sativex and Epidiolex, and has done a lot of research on the terpene and cannabinoid profile of different varieties and what they seem to do in terms of treatment for particular indications and conditions. And so I guess that there's plenty of work that goes in over many years into the selective breeding processes. The new technology obviously is CRISPR-Cas9, which you can do gene editing, so you can identify particular traits that you'd like to have included in a plant. We're not involved in that, but I think that's coming. And there'll be companies that are using gene editing to speed up the process of selection that usually happens through the longer, sort of more traditional breeding process. I've also been talking to a gentleman based in the UK who has a large germplasm bank of genetics from landrace varieties from around the world. And I think there's an opportunity there for the countries and the regions where cannabis derives from to participate in this industry instead of it being dominated in the exclusive domain of North Americans and Europeans and Australasians. I think, in Asia, from China and even Japan, through Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, Burma, Nepal, India, through the Middle East and Afghanistan, Pakistan, there's lots of genetics in there that haven't been tampered with or developed in the same way as those varieties that we see coming out of North America and Europe. And so if we can develop partnerships and relationships with communities that are much poorer than most of those in the developed world who are making the big money out of cannabis, we could use some of those genetics and pay royalties to the communities, develop breeding programs there. And for many of them, there's pretty significant penalties still in their countries, but places like Thailand are liberalizing very quickly around the opportunity in cannabis that's emerged. And for many, it's possible to develop support with the governments and universities and things to develop their own breeding programs and bring those genetics that are perhaps more pure or have particular features that the industry will be looking for into the global marketplace for genetics. And one of the opportunities we have, I guess, is that there's a lot of knowledge and intelligence in plant science in places like New Zealand and in Europe that have been applied to many other crops, and because of prohibition, they haven't been able to do much with cannabis, but that's changing fairly quickly. And so we're confident and optimistic and excited about the potential of utilizing that knowledge in the cannabis breeding space as well. So looking forward to getting our scientists, and they're very keen to get involved with the sector. We've got some plant scientists who have been working with hops for many years here, and it's a cousin to cannabis. They're super keen to start applying some of their expertise to cannabis. So yeah, again, I'm not an expert, but that's just a general overview, some thoughts on cannabis genetics. And
you'd be surprised. That's a hell of a lot of information, again, for people who don't have as much access to the data as yourself may have. Jeremy Plum sounds like a great man to have on this show and maybe have a deep down conversation with. I might ask you to do an introduction to him and see if he'd be interested in coming on. I'm not going to keep you much longer. Just one little thing. I know I'd be killed if I didn't ask somebody like you. Have you got any tips for growing either indoor or outdoor over here or anywhere in the country? Just basically anything simple that most people might not have the idea about.
Not particularly, because I'm not an expert grower by any stretch of the imagination. Again, we've got those people on team. But yeah, and again, it depends on the context in which you're growing. So we've grown outdoors and we're growing indoors. We've also got glass house operations getting going. And again, because of the context that we're growing in for pharmaceuticals, we have to try and produce the most consistent chemovars in terms of their cannabinoid profile. So imagine like an aspirin or something has to have the same level of ibuprofen or whatever in every pill. As pharmaceutical cannabis, we have to have, if we're selling flowers to Germany, it has to be within a very narrow range of variation, particularly in THC and CBD levels. So to get that consistency, growing indoors seems to be the best option, because you can control all of the environmental factors, and if any of those change, cannabis is a very fickle plant, and you just need a little bit more light or a little bit more water or change the nutrients, and the chemical expression can change dramatically. So having everything standardized for pharmaceutical production is important. Having said that, obviously the cost of indoor growing is massive compared to outdoor production, and so we're also very focused on proving that we can produce pharmaceutical cannabis outdoors. It may be that we can only use that, and probably will be only be able to use that for extracts, oils and tinctures and topicals. But we're very very focused in prioritizing that at the moment because of the costs involved and the opportunities for our growers who have only sort of in the illicit market grown outdoors. So that's where their expertise lies for many of them. So yeah, we'll see how it goes. The signs are good that the chemical profiles are going to be okay for extractions. But yeah, in terms of other growing, I guess, yeah, the other thing is with pharmaceuticals is we've got to keep heavy metals and pesticides out of the final product. So biological controls is a big imperative for our company, and finding ways to control pests and disease, fungi and mold that don't involve herbicides and pesticides and things is critical. And there's many experts in those regimes. And again, great to see the sort of organic principles, organic cultivation being applied in pharmaceutical grade cannabis. May not be quite as efficient, but the final product hopefully is safer and more likely to pass those strict tests around contaminants, heavy metals, pesticides. So yeah, that's sort of where we're at with some of that. But yeah, I'm not an expert in lights.
No, as I said, I think that's a wealth of information for a lot of people who are getting into this. You might be thinking about setting up a company that, again, just even the facet and the wide range of things that need to be maintained and to be kept at the exact right balance is something that a lot of people should give heed to. This isn't something that's easy, that you can just get into and think it's going to be just a walk in the park. This will be a high intellectual capacity job that's going to require a lot of heartache and heartbreak along the way. So be prepared for that, anybody looking to get into the industry. I'm going to leave you there, Manu. I'm not going to keep you longer. For anybody who wants to know anything about Manu's company, you can see the email or the website there, ruabio.com. Go check them out. I'd love to have you back on in a couple of months. Hopefully things have changed a little bit differently in New Zealand and we're able to have a little celebratory joint over this conversation. So I can't thank you enough again, Manu. Have a great evening, and thanks everybody for watching. We'll be back next week.